long time ago, guys. 1346. Mongols cut off the trade route between Italy and China. So there was a trade route between Italy and China, and the Mongols cut that trade route off by putting their army there, and then they began attacking cities. Any trading station that was left, they began to attack it. During this same time, the Mongols came down with a plague. And when the bodies of their own people died, just saying a little bit about the Mongols, they took the body parts of their dead fellow soldiers who had died of this plague, and they put it in giant catapults, basically, and launched body parts over the walls into the cities. Now, you got to remember, these body parts are infected with a plague. What happened was, eventually the battles raged and raged, and in the spring of 1937, listen to me, in the spring of 1937, the Italians fled back to Italy carrying the plague with them. Over the next 3 years, the bubonic plague spread throughout Europe, killing 20 million people. 20 million people. Close of half of Europe's population was wiped out by the bubonic plague. The Black Plague, they also call it the Black Plague, would pop up a few other times in the 20th century, and finally we developed antibiotics, which are a good thing. There have been other plagues. Influenza killed 50 million people in 1918 to 1919. You think about it today. Today we get the flu, but because of modern medicine and because we can get stuff to help our symptoms, only hundreds of people die every year in America. 50 million died in 1918-19 because of influenza. Malaria, yellow fever, more recently AIDS. Remember, and we also had the scare from Africa, and it hit us here in Dallas, of Ebola. And that freaked us all out because we were thinking, what happens if there is an outbreak, a plague of Ebola? We're all going to die. My life is over. Listen to this. There's one plague, though. There is one plague that has infected every single human being that has ever lived, and it's called sin. Listen to me. Sin has killed more people than any other plague. In fact, sin has killed more people than every single plague or sickness combined. Right. Sin is the deadliest plague ever to hit human beings. Now, we don't normally think of sin as being a plague that infects us and kills us, but that is exactly what it is. And here's how this plague works. We're born with it. We're born with it. And the more that we sin, the more it infects the totality of our body. And the more and more we give in to sin, the more and more it takes over. And as a result, the less and less human we become. Have you ever noticed, one of my shows that I watch all the time is Walking Dead? But listen to this. Have you ever noticed that zombies are an analogy for sin?
Yeah.
Have you ever seen that? Think about it. In The Walking Dead, everybody has the disease. Everybody has it. And when you die, what ends up happening is everything shuts down except a few default functions, and you come back and you walk around as this zombie trying to kill people. And they always say this too. Well, you know that's not them. You know that's not them. You know that's not them. So they can go to a friend and stab them in the head and kill them because, they're not really them. But here's what you need to understand. Listen to me. Sin infects us in such a way that the more we give into it, the less human we actually become. And you say, give me some examples, Neil, of that. Okay, I'll give you some examples. In the Old Testament, Israel stops worshiping Yahweh and they start worshiping false gods. And they get to a place where they sacrifice their own children to a false god, and Moloch. And here's how they would sacrifice to Moloch. They would have an idol of Moloch that was made of metal, and they would put a furnace underneath it. And they would walk their children into this furnace. They would shut the door and they would light the furnace, and they would literally fry their children alive inside of this idol to Moloch. Let me ask you a question. Is that not inhumane? I mean, we see that, we hear that, and we go, that is not even what humans should do. Well, it gets worse with Israel, because Israel ended up actually killing their own children and boiling their own children and eating them. Now, again, listen to me. Again, you can say, man, that's disgusting. Man, that's gross. Man, and you're right, it is. But that is what sin does. Sin never just wants a little bit. Ever. And listen, students, the whole time I've been preaching, the adults have been amening. You know why? Listen, because they've experienced this. They've lived longer than you to see what sin has done to their own lives and what sin has done to the people's lives they love. So they're amening it in a way that you can understand it. All right? And that's why I'm trying to use examples, because I'm trying to get you to get sin will not just come. Now, here's what sin does. Sin will say, oh, just do this. Just this little thing over here. It's not a big deal. And as soon as it grabs a hold of you, guess what it does? It begins spreading, and it begins pulling you, and it begins wanting more and more and more. I have heard stories of pastors who have lost their ministries, all because there was a woman at the gym. This is a true story. A pastor saw a woman at the gym and just noticed her and just watched her work out and just lusted after her. And then he started following her home. Then one day he came up to the door and he rang the doorbell of a woman he had never met before. And he was about to ruin his entire life. And all it started with was him just noticing the girl working out. Because that's what sin does. Sin it's infectious, and it gets us, and we're born in it, and it just keeps destroying and destroying and destroying. Tonight we are going to talk about this sin problem and how God deals with this sin problem through what we call justification. Okay? That is the theological word I want you to remember for tonight. Justification. That's what we're talking about. The forgiveness of sin. Now in Romans chapter 8, verse 33, that's not the text I want you to turn to yet, but in Romans chapter 8, verse 33, here's what we read. It tells us that it is God who justifies. It is God who justifies. No one except God can justify a sinner. Nobody but God can justify a sinner. Now, these are powerful words. These are powerful words that God does this. Andrew Murray, famous pastor, theologian, author, here's what he says. If we are going to understand justification, if we're going to understand it, we must turn our thought to the action of God. So some of you aren't paying attention. When you think about justification, you immediately, when you hear that word, all of your being and attention should turn to the action of God. Immediately. Any verse you look at regarding justification, you are going to see that it is God who does the justifying. And anybody who thinks that they can attempt to justify themselves or that somebody else can justify them is deceiving themselves. The best that you can do about yourself is just speak well of yourself. The best that anybody else can do about you is just to speak well of you. Only God can justify. You may think that is easily understood. But I want you, as I was putting this together, I want you to think about this. Listen to this. I want you to see how privileged you are. The vast majority of human beings on this planet have never heard that. What I just said to you, what you know, the vast majority of human beings have never even heard it. You see, that's why I get mad when you don't pay attention. It's not because I can't blow past you and just keep going. I can't. Like, I'm enough ADD off the walls that I can ignore you and keep doing my thing. The reason why I stop to get you to pay attention is because I am telling you things that the vast majority of human beings on the planet have never heard, and you just take it for granted. And that's stupid. God is the one who justifies. I want you to turn to 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 21. This is the text that we will be in tonight. 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 21. I have preached this text before when we did our Beautiful Creatures series. If you were around for that series, Beautiful Creatures. This was the last verse that we looked at in that series. And I just want to walk through this. I want to break it down. I want to walk through it. It'll be 20 minutes, all right? Verse 21. For our sake, he made him to be sin who knew no sin, that in him we might become the righteousness of God. Think, what? And that's why God gives us teachers and pastors to teach this. We're going to break this verse down. First thing Paul says, for our sake. Did you see that? For our sake. The hour that he is talking about are those for whom Christ has died, and they themselves have died to their sin, and they have become part of the new creation of God. So God justifies the ungodly. Jesus died to justify human beings who were sinners, which is you, and bring them into the new creation. It says, for our sake, for me, for us, the church, he made him. Now you got to know who the he and the him are. Okay? To get this, to understand this, you got to know who the he and the him are. He made him. The first he is God the Father. The second him, is Jesus. So the he is God the Father, the him is Jesus. So for our sake, God the Father made Jesus to be sin. Now, Romans chapter 4, verses 4 and 5 says that God justifies the ungodly. Now these are wonderful words because we are the ungodly. We are the ones who need to be justified. When you think about it, you realize that no one but God could actually justify those who were guilty because nobody else would do this. I want you to listen to this. No one except God would look at somebody who was guilty and say, not guilty. Right? If you knew someone was guilty for sure and you were the judge, you wouldn't go, I know you're guilty, but you're not guilty. No human being would do that. We would all say, no, you're guilty and you get what you deserve. God is the only one who looks at people who are guilty and declares them not guilty. Only God has the right to do that. When an honest attorney goes into a court on behalf of an innocent person, he pleads for his client's case before court, making every effort to justify his client, to get his client off, to prove that his client is not guilty. But if an attorney tries to convince people that their client's not guilty when he knows he's guilty, we all say, that's immoral, man. You're a lawyer, you know your client is guilty and you're trying to get him off? Man, that's immoral, that's gross, that's nasty, who are you? Yet this is exactly what God does. God justifies people that he knows are guilty of the most vile and wicked sins. Let me repeat that. God looks at people who are guilty of the most vile and gross sins, and he says, not guilty, when he knows they're guilty. This causes a problem. Okay? And theologians call it the problem of justification. So it's the next point. How can a just God justify the guilty? How can a good, righteous, loving, good, holy God look at someone who's guilty and say, not guilty? How is that possible? This is the problem that it poses. It's called the problem of justification. How can a just God justify the guilty? Christopher Hitchens, my favorite atheist. My favorite atheist. He was a brilliant man and just so smart. Disagreed with everything he said in his pretty much his entire life. He said this. He said, I cannot believe in Christianity because it is actually immoral for a holy God to look at someone who's a sinner and says, you get off the hook. That's actually an immoral thing. He opposed Christianity because he saw the problem of justification. He saw the problem. Now, the issue with people that see the problem is that, like every other problem, there is an answer. He didn't do the work to find out the answer. He just had the problem. But you can understand why he would think, why it doesn't make sense to him that us Christians believe in a God who just looks at people who are guilty and says, I know that you're guilty of murdering 1,000 people, but I'm going to declare you not guilty. It's the problem of justification. Now, I want to be clear about something. Let me be clear about something. God does not just decide to make someone not guilty simply because he just decided he wants to do it. In other words, God doesn't go, yeah, I know you're a sinner, and I know you've done vile things, and I know you're a murderer, and you're an adulterer, and I know that you worship idols, and I know that you actually ate your own children, and I know that you sacrificed them to Moloch, but you know what? I've just decided not guilty. That is not what God does. Now, that's what Christopher Hitchens, the atheist, thought God did, but that's not what God does. This brings us to these two final points, the main points of verse 21. Verse 21 doesn't just tell us that God justifies. He tells us also how he does it. How does a holy and just God look at people who are guilty and declare them not guilty? What is the solution to the problem of justification? This is where the second hymn comes into play. The first hymn is God, right? God the Father. God the Father declares people not guilty. God justifies sinners. But there's a second hymn in our verse. God made him, Jesus, who knew no sin. Jesus never sinned. But God made him to be sin. I need you to catch this visual. Okay? I need you to catch this visual. You are a human being, and let's pretend as a human being that you have an account. Like, you know what a bank account is, or a checking account, whatever, right? Let's pretend that you have a sin account. Okay? Now listen to me. Look at me. You have a sin account. Every sin you've ever committed goes into that account. So you're born a sinner. That's enough to condemn you right there. But then you pile up all this sin into your account. All right? Imagine if I could go to a computer program and print out every sin you've ever committed in your life. Every thought, every deed, every word, every attitude, and it printed it all out so that you could see what your account looked like. Okay? Here's what Jesus did. Jesus went to the cross. He knew no sin. Jesus never sinned. Jesus didn't have an account with sin in it like we do. But Jesus goes to the cross and he says, here's what I'm going to do. I am going to take all the sin that is in the account of God's people and I'm going to put that on me. So here's Neil Salem with my massive sin account. And Jesus says, Neil Salem, I'm going to take your account, every single last bit of the sin in your account, and I'm going to put it on me. I'm going to die for it. Now don't get any thought that Jesus was like a little child that God the Father was like, you're going to go to the cross and I'm going to put sin on you and I'm going to get you and punish you. No. This was Jesus' plan too, guys. This was God the Father and God the Son and God the Holy Spirit's plan. Jesus actively did this. And he took my sin and he took the sin of every single Christian that will ever live and he put it on himself. And when Jesus died, your sin, every last bit of it, was removed out of your account. And it was put on Jesus. And he died for it. For our sake, God the Father made him, Jesus, to be sin who knew no sin. Do you understand what Jesus has done for you? What would happen, guys, if you had to stand before God and give an account for all that sin? What would you do when you stand before a holy God and there's your account and you have to present it before God and he's going to judge you for it? What would you do? But those of us who have had our sin account cleared and given to Jesus, here's what we say. We've been forgiven. We've been forgiven. That account that I used to have is clear. Has a zero balance. My sin account used to be in the quadrillions. And Jesus, through one act, cleared it all and brought it to zero. Oh, and by the way, it never gets filled back up again. Because anything that I haven't done yet that I'm going to do that's a sin, he took that too. He took it before I ever did it. It's not like God just took my past sins and then I get saved and then I got to go back to God and get forgiven for the new stuff. No. All of it, past, present, future, all of it taken in my account, zero balance. But here's what's crazy, guys. Justification doesn't stop there. It doesn't stop there. Now here I am. Here's Neil Salem. I got a zero account balance. Jesus died for all of my sin, right there. Jesus died for it. My balance is now zero. But then look at the rest of this verse. Why did he make him who knew no sin? So that we might become the righteousness of God. Christian, listen to me. God took what was in my account, which was nothing but sin, okay? And he brought it to a zero balance. But he did not stop there. See, when Jesus was on the earth, he lived a perfect life. Perfect. He never did what was wrong, and he always did what was right. If I were to ask you how righteous is Jesus, the answer should be perfectly righteous. Perfectly righteous. Here's what also goes down, guys. Listen to this. Here's what goes down. God takes the righteousness of Jesus, which is perfect, and he sees your zero account balance that has just been cleared. And instead of saying, you're forgiven, there's your zero account balance, God goes, oh, no, I got much more than that. I'm going to take the righteousness of Jesus and I'm going to put it into your account. So instead, Neil Sandler does not have a zero balance account. No Christian has a zero balance account. God brought it down to zero by forgiving you, and then he filled it back up and infinitely filled it up with the righteousness of Jesus Christ. We call this the great exchange. He took my sin and he exchanged it for his righteousness. That is what justification is. It is all of my sin getting removed so I have a zero balance, and God giving me the righteousness of Jesus into my account so that now I live out faithfully. People get to see my life that is different. And even when I screw up as a Christian, guess what God sees? Perfect righteousness. Christian, listen to me. Listen to me. Every time you sin, the devil wants to come and grab a hold of you and condemn you. Man, how could you say you really love Jesus if you do this? How can you say you love Jesus if you do that? How could you really say that you're a Christian if this is still part of your life? And the devil comes and accuses us and he tries to condemn us. But the Bible says there is no condemnation for those who are in Jesus Christ. How can that be true? How is it that I cannot be condemned for anything? Because when God looks at my account, you know what he sees? Zero sin, infinite righteousness. Zero sin, and infinite righteousness. Why? Let's go back to the very first point. It is God who justifies. How did this all happen? What did Andrew Murray say? The way we understand justification is we take our lives and we turn it and we look to God. And we say, God, the reason why I am justified, the reason why I am forgiven, the reason why I am made righteous has zero to do with me. Nothing. My faith didn't do it. My actions didn't do it. The only thing that did it was the grace of God. My faith is a gift from God. I didn't sit and just muster up enough faith and go, okay, God, you just wait, and when I get enough faith, then you justify me. Hang on. Okay, we ready? We good? We good? No, it would never work that way because I don't even have any faith. That's a gift from God. So, Christian, listen to me. You need to understand what we are declaring in the Apostles' Creed when it says that we believe in the forgiveness of sin. Do not just think, well, that means I can go to God and ask for forgiveness. That's not what they meant. That I could just go to God and ask for forgiveness. What they meant was, I believe in justification. I believe that all my sin is forgiven. I believe that I am right with God. I believe that the righteousness of Jesus is in my account. That's what they mean when they say they believe in the forgiveness of sin. They believe in an exchange that took place. They believe in a transformed spiritual reality that can never change. That can never change. So we don't put our trust in anything except Christ. His life, his death, his resurrection. The solution to the problem turns out to be a person, Jesus. So when the atheist, look at me, when the atheist Christopher Hitchens says, how can a righteous, holy God look at someone who's guilty and declare them not guilty? The answer is a person. Christopher, you missed it. It's Jesus, buddy. It's Jesus. He is the reason why. How can an absolutely infinitely holy God be friends with a sinner? How can his just and holy law, which demands that he condemn and punish anyone who has sinned, how can he give mercy to me? How can he uphold his righteousness and give grace? Jesus. We believe in the forgiveness of sin because we believe